Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's an evening nature folklore here at Carol Crory. It's 13th of October in the evening, as I say, 2021. And I don't actually have an intro video for you. So thank you for anybody who's joining in at the moment. This is kind of hurriedly put together and as I say, got the green screen here. And I've only just been putting the photos up, so I'm sort of a little bit lost at the moment. But thank you for joining. As I say, we usually have a weekly time for exploring nature folklore, connecting with our favorite sanctuary space, and expressing this through our poetry, writing, arts, crafts, performance, and problem solving. Now, this evening's theme is part 3 of Witches, Cauldrons Ale. And this episode is From Witches to Healers, and it's the 4th episode of 8-episode series that I'm doing for Sawan. Now, this evening I'm going to be exploring the branding of alehouse wives, how they became branded as witches, and how some of those women actually escaped that, many of them actually, and also I'm going to talk about the witchery interpretation today. And today it's really focused more on healing and care rather than brewing. And I've got some upbeat news about today's alehouse women, because they're still around the world and in parts of the world absolutely thriving well. Now, as I say, these nature folklore sessions and the Carracroy Labyrinth Gardens, whilst we have them, of course, is sponsored there by wonderful subscribers to Patreon that probably watching live today. So thank you for the support, because I wouldn't be on this evening. It is an extra one this evening. And as I say, I've rushed put together. I haven't had time to configure extra stuff here. It seems the green screen is behaving today. I've got harsh lights on, and I got a lovely sponsor who's actually gifted me with some soft lights, so it evens out the green screen, but they hadn't arrived in time for this evening, but they're supposed to be arriving tomorrow. So I'll get suddenly with a fresh start with wonderful soft lights that will bring up the green screen a lot crisper. So let's see who's found their way to us today, which is lovely. We got Lee Lynch, and it's lovely that you've come in from the YouTube, because I didn't get to promote this evening one in the usual way that I get people onto the YouTube. So thanks very much for Lee for joining in here. You discovered the channel, happy to support it. Look forward to what you have to say. And Seventh Serpent, also YouTube. So this is going to be I didn't promote YouTube, so this is going to be a YouTube night for the people joining in, which is fabulous. This is, I apologize, it's not going to, as if Sundays are very tight, but I haven't got the photos in order, so it's going to be quite random. And so I hope you enjoy the story, even though if I don't find the correct photos of what I'm trying to tell you about. So anyway, to recap on part 1, I introduced there how beer and ale has been an essential part of our human diet for at least 7,000 years, probably 10,000 years. And here's a very early engraving of that of alehouse wives. And the entire history of brewing, it goes way back into ancient times, 10,000 BC. And all of this history of brewing is very much the history of women. And the women were the brewers, definitely. So early archaeological studies have found and confirmed that certainly women were involved in brewing, and that comes from Mesopotamia, which I've shown a couple of times. And that's from 2000 BC Iran, I think, inscribing, or maybe earlier. I thought I read somewhere from Mesopotamia 7000 BC. But in this, there's a description of a woman in the story that's on this slab, and they're called an alehouse wife when it was translated. And I told that on episode 1. So This is the earliest record that's known, and I've been putting together fragmented pieces to discover what the alehouse wife is, and how that tradition has spread west through various clans, tribes, and nations for thousands of years since, and it skirted around the patriarchal culture of the Roman Empire, eventually got up into the northern tribes of the Saxons, Angles, Jutes, Danes, Vikings, and other Norse people. And the men up there, they treated the alehouse women as goddesses. They were kind of thought of as some kind of goddesses. These are not exactly the goddesses, but that's the logo I've been showing. And I did try and find some Saxon, some Norse goddess pictures. As I say, unfortunately, I've got my pictures so random. So I hope I've got some goddess pictures for you of Norse. I thought I did. It looks like I haven't managed to throw them up. So sorry, you might have to wait till next year for that one. I'm just flashing through what I got here so I can present. Anyway, now that I've got a bit of an idea of pictures that we got, I know which ones I can throw up for you. But for thousands of years among human existence, there has been this unfillable demand for alcoholic beverages and spirits too. Because us humans, we seem to be very urged to consume this, don't we? So the making, trade, and supply of most alcoholic drinks was by women, and most of their customers were men. So bringing up those women again, and again finding more. There's one woman, a man there. That's a lovely, supposed to be an Iranian Mesopotamia picture of a man going to a woman's alehouse. Of course, it looked like they drank the ales a bit differently to something like this. Oh, is that? Oh, yes, I think that might be one of the. That might be one of the Viking ones I pulled up that I was looking for a moment ago. So, as I say, excuse me for the randomness of this at the moment. Now, during part two, I became much more local with the alehouse wife traditions. I covered how the alehouse wife traditions seem to arrive from what is the UK, through the Angles, the Saxons, and Jute traditions, and also included how in Ireland the brewing is part of the legends of Bridget. And it's not really told so much of Bridget. And I found a nice Bridget picture earlier. If I can see if I can recognize that. That might be. I love this one. I've been showing the one of Bridget in Kildare, but that's a nice kind of pen and ink drawing of her. Anyway, even during the Saxon and medieval times and the island times, for many women, the creation and distribution of alcoholic beverages, it was a sound alternative to being slaves, because certainly around 5th century, early medieval times, half the women were definitely property. They didn't have the rights. A lot of people talk about the Briton laws and the equal rights for women, but for half the women, that didn't apply. It was generally the people of the women of the upper echelons that got that kind of protection. So the alehouse wives themselves, they had the skills of housework and brewing and making. So they used their initiative and they set up independently because they knew that men demanded ale and also a kind of second wife on the side. And that's something they could set up independently. And I'm going to show how that's interesting, because instead of being slaves, the men became slaves to these women, because the men departed with their money, and the more ale they got, the more money they departed. And that's how the alehouse women kind of got a position and an independence for themselves. And they tended to, initially they set up their ale houses very simply, very humble, very rustic. And I'm trying to get the picture up for you. This is one of the first alehouse women buildings. Don't say I didn't put it up. I must have brought it up. So this is very important stuff. There it is. As I say, I apologize for you watching that I haven't got my ducks in a row as I usually do, but these would be beside holy wells. They needed to be by the wells because they needed a water supply. They might have been thatched. This is covered with hides, or it might be a mix of hides and thatch. And these brewing huts, as I say, positioned by the sacred wells and essential for their brewing. And I feel very much that the traveller culture that's around today may have actually commenced with the offspring of these alehouse women. Just a theory. I've not read about that one, but it seems to make sense, because if you've ever met traveling people at wells, I have a few times, the way they approach the wells and the way they revere them, it's as if they lived right next to them. Well, they would have had to anyway. Anybody had to live near them for the water supply. But it's that kind of reverence that they were at service, because if you go up to traveling people at a well, the first thing they do is give you one of their containers of water. It's like as if they're giving you a flagon of ale. It's regarded as a healing gift. So that's where I get the feeling there's a connection anyway. And as I say, these women, they were people who did make dough and baked bread, planted and grew herbs, and they boiled their ingredients in black cauldrons. And these cauldrons were the magic spell makers that got them started in their brewing exercises, and so they could break away from their enslavement. Now, the ancient women discovered that through their cauldrons, as I say, they could satisfy the demand for alcoholic beverages. But one of the reasons they did this, it wasn't to get the men drunk. It's because even in the early farming days, even back to the Iron Age, there wasn't an understanding of what effect the runoff would be from farming. Even though the farming was taking a lot smaller areas now, there was runoff. It was polluting water. So the water direct from the wells, and kind of instead of filtration going through the process of making ale, it made a very safe drink. And because there wasn't the additives in their ale, you're not going to get a headache, drunk, and all that type of thing. It's a bit like if you got real poaching today compared with a bought whiskey. You don't get the sort of headache and stuff from real poaching if it's made properly, that type of stuff. So as it was hard to get clean, safe water, people drank ale perhaps more than the water. And so it was conceived as a health tonic drink. That's what ale was. So it fits in with herbalists and the witchery in a way. And I talked about the importance of the alehouse women's brooms as well. And this is in a German pub that when the ale's ready, put the broom outside. And there is a medieval one here that depicts that. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my background here to put that up, and we'll have some fun with that one. Yeah, there we go. And so that's the symbolism, just saying, look, the ale's ready, come and get it. But I also mentioned about how the alehouse women would go to the markets to lure the customers, and they would go to the markets. I think I got a picture to remind you of that. They got to, there you go. It came and went. There was a woman here. Yeah, there she is. This is a modern woman dressing up, but this is it. See what she's got? The pointy hat. If you went into the market and there's a woman with a pointy hat, that means she's got some brew ready. Just follow that woman like the Pied Piper, and you'd end up with what you got behind me. The broom would be sticking out, and that's for passers-by to show that the ale is ready. And I also talked about the children that these alehouse women bore and how they integrated into the brewing business as well, rather than go to school. They couldn't be afforded at school. The women needed them as soon as possible to get involved in the brewing business. So that was their education, and that was their apprenticeship. And they naturally carried on to either expand their mother's brewery, or they go off independently. I'm going to talk a bit about that as well very shortly. But what happened was that they soon moved along. They started with the humble beginnings, as I mentioned last time, with the hat, which I can't find again. And they got into things much larger, like that picture I've shown you. They got into wooden huts. Again, I apologize for not having my pictures in order today, but there's a lot going on with the, if you might be familiar, the cottage is up for sale. And so I've been dealing with people on that as well. So rather than put this together, but I should be backbone balanced, I think. No, I don't have a larger premises. I'll probably find it shortly. Anyway, I'll move on with this. But as they expanded, they would have got barn areas. The barn areas were for people perhaps that were travelers and needed a bed for a night. They might needed a hot bath because they got the cauldrons going. There's the hot water. They could have a hot bath. This is all extra income and that they could expand with. So this is the way that they went. And I introduced how through 1,000 years of medieval age, 5th century to 15th century, the legacy of the alehouse wife's descendants, their children and so forth, they went from that humble wicker dome shelters into more established bars and taverns. Yeah, I'm trying to find some bars and tavern pictures. I do have them here somewhere, but they're not throwing up. This is definitely going to be better. I'll have it better for you when I do this one next one, but I'll get through what I can here. Do I have a tavern? No, I don't have a tavern because the thumbnails are thumbnails. Oh, there we go. That's something. This is a bit more advanced, but this is something that they kind of advanced into from those little domes by the holy wells to something like that. And that would have been fully equipped. That would be an inn by now. So anyway, I showed some examples of actual pubs and taverns in the UK and in Ireland that actually operate today. And they started with the legacy of alehouse women from medieval times. So it's fascinating. And I also included this one, which is Kytella's. This is in Kilkenny. That was established more late medieval times by an alehouse woman that was called Alice. And do I have a picture of Alice? I got a picture of Alice here, and this is her in the courtroom, Alice Kytella, because she was accused of witchcraft, and unfortunately she was burned. And she was actually the first, I gather she was the first witch to be burned at the stake in Ireland. And on the 3rd of November, 1324, this was. And this was before any women had been burned at the stake in Britain. So it's quite a thing. And she had all kinds of charges. But funnily enough, well, I don't suppose it was very funny, but one of the charges she had was making and issuing love potions to corrupt the purity of the Christians. Yeah, that's right. Love potions to corrupt the purity of the Christians. One of the things she was charged with. So maybe that was her making her love potion there. I also started talking about the very first established church monastic communities around the island. They started about the 5th century. I've got some sophisticated pictures of them as they grew. They got very sophisticated as they became established. So this is kind of thing. You got the educational area in the middle. You got the church. You got the colleges. You got the scriptoriums, and then you got the people around the outside. But this was definitely, looking at this, this was more 5th century, 6th century, 7th, 9th century when it got as sophisticated as this. It was very humble when they started off. That may be more like, that would have been 6th, 7th century. That looks like Glendalough, doesn't it? But that gives you a gist of the idea of the monastic communities anyway that started off. Now, the main intent of these monastic communities at the time was, and I think, go back to the picture that really shows that well, establishing scriptoriums. And because the scribed works that went on in that center, they were of an immense wealth. This was like the first, like Google and Facebook and LinkedIn, those type of things when they established. You know, they became the wealth centers of the data era that we got now. And this is what was happening on the monastic sides. They sort of touched around it 5th century, and then Columbkill really advanced the whole scribing industry in Derry and Doro, and then on to Iona. And that got duplicated even greater in Kells, in Drumcliff, in Sligo and elsewhere. Got more and more sophisticated, and they were getting more investment from the chieftain mentors, not mentors, that's the wrong word, their supporters, their patrons. And these patrons wanted them to scribe all the hero stories of their family, that type of thing. And to them, it was like gold. You can't get a bar of gold and go and spend it. But a scribed work represented the collateral of their leadership, of their kingship, and of their monastic area. And I talked about major shifts that went on, going on from the 7th century onwards. And the scribing industry got into a real acceleration mode, and the human lifestyle values were changing as well. And then by the 9th century, this was halfway through the medieval age, and the changes were at an incredible speed then. Patriarchal boys' clubs were starting up. They were kind of affiliated with the church. And one of the reasons they feel they was doing, there was boys' clubs, but they had commerce. This sort of thing, tailors. That's the sort of thing that was being set up. It was a sort of boys' club in enterprises, but it was a men's industry, and there was various men's industries. Here's another one, a sort of, a sort of shop and so forth. It was men doing commerce, and they were getting larger and larger, more influential. They took over the markets, and they regarded all these commerce groups as being guilds. And they're becoming larger and more influential. And there was really men grouping together. And the last thing they had patience for was the likes of the alehouse women, who were kind of getting wealthier and more established. And the men at this time, there was competition. They wanted to take over the brewing as well. And so there was a competition against these alehouse women. Yet at the same time, all these men in these boys' clubs, here's another boys' club. There we go. There's a sort of the heads of that boys' club there. They're getting together, having a chat. Now, I guarantee you, after the market's over, one of them, there'll be the woman with the pointy hat there that was showing, the brew's ready. They'll be wandering off and in secret, following the pointy hat lady, probably taking their sort of expensive garbs off. They'll be there getting the ale, getting the loose women or whatever. Then they'll come back and they're part of the church again and all that sort of purity. And this was what was growing, especially by the 9th century. They were developing the lads like this, as well as trying to control the commerce. They were linking it to the church, and they were forming doctrines, interpreted standards of morality. Of course, this is what people do today. They get a sentence out, a random sentence. It's almost as if over the book, okay, I choose that sentence today, and make a doctrine out of it, a kind of code of morality, and that becomes law. And then they'll go around saying, well, it was in the scriptures, that type of thing. I don't think that's changed, has it? So this was what was going on. And of course, people, in a way, they believe them, because let's go back to these pictures of the monastic. That wasn't the clear one, was it? It was this one. That's like a university that's stuck in the middle there. And those people in the middle, they're learning Latin. They've been learning Latin, Greek. They're learning scribing. The people on the outside, they can't read anything. They don't learn to read. They learn how to farm. So the reading was exclusive to these people in the middle. So they could come up with doctrines. They could come up with laws and stuff, and be the guilds. And they couldn't be argued with, because they're the scholars. They've studied it. You have not. And so they were the gatekeepers of scripts, gatekeepers of the scribing, gatekeepers of the laws the people should follow. So this is the church getting very patriarchal now. And we're kind of gone past the 9th century. And these secret societies of men were getting impatient with these alehouse women. And it seemed that fear was gathering amongst these men, they were forming their alliances. They were forming a kind of a fortress, not necessarily stone fortress, but it was a fortress of doctrine around them. You either follow it or you will be criminalized, that type of thing. And the women were challenging their turfs of wealth, because from the humble alehouse women, they were now, their taverns had become legendary, and the families were taking them over, even their sons. Of course, the sons would be out and about with this. So it did seem that the wealthier alehouse women were getting big. The men were getting frustrated, and I gather the women will realize that if they didn't do something, there was going to be trouble. So they did attempt to form alliances with the men's, with these guilds. And because they could see, well, if we sort of came into partnership with this is going to be good for all of us. We can both increase our wealth and status and position. But no, the men that were in their strong guilds, they had their fortresses. It had to be for them or nothing. This is what appears to happen. So these church gilded boys' clubs, with their veneers of Christian morality and purity, there was tension regarding the idea of female alliances. And even for the sons, it must have been very difficult for the sons of these alehouse women, because where was their allegiance? Was it with their mothers and the brewery? But men like to be amongst men a lot of the time. So in order to be accepted by the men, they needed to join these guilds too. And there's quite a few individual stories of where the sons have turned on their mothers and accused them, well, of what I'm going to talk about very shortly. So the alehouse wives, they did share the skills with their sons. The sons helped out the mothers, but then the sons wanted independent businesses when they were adults and they got their own family. It's understandable. It's what happened today. So how did these sons establish themselves as male brewers? They had to do it through these boys' club guilds. There's no doubt, the way I'm talking, that brewing, even from ancient times, when it was in Mesopotamia, even Egypt, where the men really took over quickly, and certainly in the Norse time, brewing defined the human power. And it defined human power through clans, through tribes, then through nations, over about 9,000 years. Throughout the world, more than anything, it was ale that defined, or beer, defined the tribe, defined the nation. And I think it's fiction myself. But the people who handed out the people's ale mugs, and I must have an ale mug picture, surely. Let's have some ale mug pictures here, if I can find. There we go. There we go. Woman with a. They're the people who had operated the levers of power over people. If you're carrying a couple of mugs of ale like that, you're definitely in the position of the levers of power. You're the one that's everyone's to your beckoning. If you've got the ale mugs, you're in charge. And so the alehouse women thoroughly earned the revered status of that power. But sadly, because of these guilds, that from 10th, 11th century, that fast started declining. And that's what I'm going to talk about for a while now. We were coming up to 11th century, total restructuring of culture, and there was more manageable templates. And then we got into feudalism. And feudalism really came about because the boys, the men, they were coming back from the Crusades. And what they learned from the Crusades gave them a whole sense of how they could actually change the culture back home. Military, as you know, is in a pyramid style. It's pyramid of command. And they found that was successful. And they learned a lot from the people they were challenging out in the Far East about the structures they were living by. And though they were at war with that, something we've learned here. This is something we can take back. So very much with the Norman principle, which was really from the Norse, everything was changing to this pyramid culture. So the feudal system started up. So I'm going to give you a quick, if you can read that a bit. There's how feudal system works. I hope you can actually read that with the king at the top. They have the lords, and then the people that went out to the crusades as servants, the people at the bottom, but they came back as the knights. They had been granted a higher position, but you still got the serfs and everybody at the bottom. Not much different to today. Here's today's one. There you go. That's how corporate feudalism works. Compare that to the medieval feudalism. And again, you haven't got anything changed. Centre bankers at the top, pink bankers, the corporate elite, the elected officials like the royal ministers, the top bureaucrats, the civil service, just like merchants. And then you got everyone else, that's us below. So anyway, you've got some comments coming. Hello from Sharon Nicol. And I'm glad to see all these YouTube people arriving here. Kitty Murrell from Italy. Kitty in Italy. Fantastic. I hope as I say, I wasn't well prepared this evening, so I hope you're following along okay. So thank you, Little Wing, for hanging on here as well. Amy Dixon. Great. No need to be sorry to be late because it is being recorded, and I'm really bumbling more than ever today, I think. And so, but glad you're with us. Glad I'm being able to do this. Very different. Had to do this in the evening because I haven't got time to put all of this in on Sundays, but I'll rearrange the schedule for Samhain next year. So it'll be a bit more thorough. So in many ways, it's a vast subject. I'm giving an introduction, and yeah, I'm enjoying. I've been enjoying putting this together, even though it's a mess, and I hope you do too. And Jerbin is here as well, and Lee Lynch from Texas. So thanks for joining in, because I didn't really publicize this as much as I usually do, with so much going on. Anyway, the feudal system I was talking about, this was the last 200 years of the medieval age, and this is getting very organized now. So during the 12th to the 14th century of feudalism, the men patriarchy was really getting strong. The guilds were getting bigger. There was the elite secret societies. They took over the business of brewing. And let's have some elitist photos. I think I've got some elitist photos. No, that's the women in brewing. There we go. I think that's there's a bunch of men. Now that's interesting. We have a monk, and they got into quite something serious on the side. I'm trying to get to my bunch of elitist photos. There's some men having. Well, actually, you know, they were sort of middle echelons, aren't they? But they're still a guild. And they might have been towards the, you know, oh, lads, how can we take over this? Brewing from the women, that type of stuff might have been chatting there. But I think you can understand what was building up here. I love this elitist man here. He's got his brew and his wiener. And so he's just left the guild for a minute. And, we've had those people. What do we got here? Yeah, this is men that were starting to get in the brewing. They were in competition because that brewing would have been a guild as well. The guilds of brewing, and still would have been church connected, fascinatingly. So that was going on, and I think that's another gilded brewing establishment. So the men were really competing now. They were getting into the alehouse situation. And I think this is another, there you go, there's another one. That explains the feudalism as well. There you go. The king owned the land, but I give some of the barons. There's the baron. And there you go. King gave the land, but you got to be loyal to him. That's how the scribes were as well. They were like the barons in a way. And then, of course, you got the villain there. The knights gave me some, and you got to do as you're told. So that's all part of that feudal system, and they were now taking over brewing. But it didn't stop the women and their brewing. What the women did is they took their brewing into the nunneries. Now, the one thing I haven't mentioned is there was the persecution just starting to come on with these women. And unfortunately, I never got many photos of this. But what was happening, there was a populist witch hunt that was starting to come on now. How were the men going to take over the brewing? What was happening here? And this is where the witches' story started. Because these guilds, these men's guilds, it was very much an urban tradition. And that's where you could get the groups of lads together. And I suppose the same thing. Talking today, it's all digital. So the likes of the Google, Facebook, Twitter, and so forth, they're all in the cities, and they're all clubs of people. Of course, it's men and women now, so it's a bad comparison because there's a lot of equality. The management of the digital is a lot of it's women, but of course, equivalent with the church and scribing, it was very much a men's world then. So it's very urban, but in the rural areas, the alehouse women were very much in the same way that the Vikings revered the alehouse women. So mainly in the rural areas, the alehouse women were highly respected. And as they became bigger and expanded, and they could afford to employ people, they were actually employing the people of the village. So they were actually spreading their wealth out to the village. So, that just expanded their whole brewing. A lot of the ale and beer was coming into urban areas from the villages, the excess. So that was bringing wealth out of urban areas to the rural. And of course, the urban people, it was too much of the wealth is being disbanded to these peasants. We've got to do something about that. So they tried to spread this idea that the brewing was playing with the devil, that these people... And at first, they went out into the villages and started spreading. Did you know that these alehouse wives, they were playing with the devil? And of course, the village people have been provided by them, saying, what is this nonsense? They thought these urban know-it-alls were just highly offensive. And in rural areas, of course, that's what happens now. And I'm trying to get a picture up on this situation. But no, I can't find the thing. Again, apologies for my disorganization with this. But the thing is how do you form alliances? And I brought it up on past editions. And my father, one of the things he lectured me over and over again, he says, if you want to get something done, buy someone a drink. And what he meant by that was the drink was symbolic. You've got to do something for the other person in order to get them onto your side. And my father was a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde. He, on one side of his life, he set up a whole network of healing circles, but on the other side, his professional life, he was a fixer, and that was his job, was with corporations that wanted to get allegiances with the peasants, I suppose you would say. He was sent out to give out the gifts. We call it handing out the brown envelopes now, but the way he was doing it, it was gifts that there wouldn't be a trace on them. And he would be able to set up things like holidays, or maybe pay for a college education for someone, or a couple of college educations, and a membership to a golf course, that type of thing. So he would have these gift packages that he could offer, and that was his way of buying someone a drink. So that's what these urban guild people did. They found out who were the leaders amongst the village areas, and they started giving them these gifts, as long as they helped them out with this propaganda that these alehouse women were really of the devil. They were playing and dancing with the devil. And that was a bad thing. And that they were witches. I wish I could find that picture for you. Maybe I didn't put it up this time. Is that one? No. They're dancing with the witch. Yeah, I don't seem to have the dancing. So you have to imagine it. No, they're not dancing with the devil on that one. Obviously, I didn't get that one up. But if you look in the previous ones, I've shown this picture a few times anyway. But the influences, if the likes of, if Killen the Scully, if anybody's seen Killen the Scully in Ireland, there's the man Willie Power, and he's like the sort of rural leader. Now, if Willie Power starts telling people something, they believe him. So, of course, these leaders were telling these people in the village, oh, these are witches, they're dancing with the devil, you'll go to hell, and all the rest of it. So suddenly, the village who had revered these alehouse women were suddenly against them, boycotting them. They weren't going to have anything to do with them. And so this whole fiction of witchery came up. Women were dancing with the devil and enchanting people into devil worship. And they had a secret sorcery of putting secret ingredients into the ale. And it wasn't just drunkenness. That was actually the devil within you. They're being enchanted, and it's hard to get that devil down. That's why people became alcoholics. It wasn't alcoholism, it was the devil. And you wouldn't be able to kill yourself until you got rid of these women, and they were burnt on the stake. And the only reason for it, of course, is the urban brewers, the guilds. They wanted to take over the country markets. And so the whole witchery thing was a bit of a con. But there was an incredible wise, and a shame I haven't got her pictures up, St. Hildegard of Bingen. Amazing woman. I've got her pictures up. There she is. I think this is, no, that's not her. No, I didn't get her picture up as well. I thought I would do. I didn't have time to get hers. Oh, this is really embarrassing. If I'm going to show you, oh yeah, there she is. There we go. This and Hildegard. Now, amazing woman. She actually set up nunneries for the purpose of brewing in Germany. And of course, these alehouse wives, they then joined in these nunneries and carried on their brewing. And the guilds, they couldn't touch them because, this was under Rome. This was a sacred sanctuary space where the nuns were. They could carry on with their brewing, and the men would secretly get into the nunneries as well, and they would trade their wares. This was stuff that wasn't talked about. But they couldn't be burnt on the stake. So St. Hildegard, she was very open with this, and she was saying how amazing hops and barley were. She really pushed the idea of hops in ale because the alehouse women were using a lot of other plants with the barley, the malted barley. They weren't necessarily using hops for ale and beer. They were using heather, for instance. They were using nettles, dandelions, that type of stuff. So Hildegard really promoted the idea of hops, and even though it does make you sleepy. And but she was saying with hops, she was not emphasizing it makes a better ale to get drunk on. She was emphasizing how hops are wonderful for calming. They're a tonic. They're bittering. Hops are very good for preserving as well. So she was promoting the health benefits of the ingredients for ale. And she wasn't really promoting the lusty indulgence for ale. She was promoting ale as a tonic that was now going to be exclusive to the nuns. And now we're talking about, again, 13th, 14th century. So, because they were protected by Rome, they couldn't be touched. So a lot of women, they joined into the nunnery, and of course, this sort of stuff started going on, and that's it. And there's a brew. There you go. Lucky Saints is a nunnery ale there. But there was this incredible woman, Sister Doris. That's all I know. Sister Doris, a lovely story there. She wanted to join a nunnery for herself. She wanted to have a life married to Christ, that type of thing. But the nunnery wouldn't let her in unless she had a trade. You needed a trade to qualify to get into a nunnery. Well, her trade was brewing. She was an alehouse woman. And so she said, yeah, I'll get you a brewery going. So that's what Doris did. And this is a modern story. That she got into the nunnery by being a brewer, and it brought in phenomenal income for the. I forget the town in Germany, and there she is trying out her wares, testing her wares in her brewery there. So there's a modern edition of what was happening under St. Hildegard. And so the alehouse women were getting into the nunnery trade. I think it's absolutely marvelous. I'm going to talk more about where women are into modern brewing a bit later on. So this, although there was the rebranding of alehouse women into being witches through the propaganda, the word witch itself I find is very interesting. It actually is a mix-up of two Saxon words. There's pica, sorry I couldn't put it up, P-I-C-C-A, and that means to create enchanting magic. Pica, creating enchanting magic. And then there's another word, weak, W-E-I-K, and that actually means making movements while bending over. Yeah. Although, I was just thinking the alehouse women, they had those other lusty services on the side. And I did show you the Mesopotamia pictures. I haven't got it this week. Going back 10,000 BC, a picture of an alehouse women stirring the mash there. And then there was the man having his way in the back. So there you go. So there was, she was Wiccan and he was joining the weak in it. So put the two together, you got witch, and funnily enough, it's probably where Wicca came from. I don't know. But those are the words for witch anyway, weak and pica. Anyway, after the 12th century, the situation became worse, for very difficult and even life-threatening for any women that were in brewing for the next 400 years, unless they joined in the nunnery and got in with the brewing there. The persecution against women was really bad in Germany, as you know. I think I read somewhere that 40,000 women were killed, were burnt in the stake, or they were dumped in water for witchery. It seems a vast amount, but I was reading that just a couple of days ago. Amazing amount. So it was really bad there. Certainly you had the witch burning in the UK and Ireland, but nothing to that level. And there was also persecution upon the sons of these women too. And in fact, the very first witch to be burned in Germany, I forget his name, he was actually a son of an alehouse woman. So a male witch, that they called, was the first to be burned at the stake in Germany. Anyway, I often think that if these men were losing women through burning the stake, or they were retreating to the nunneries, what a huge loss for these patriarchal gilded men. Oh yeah, we're with Christ and we're moral and all the rest of it. And they were setting fire to their fun. Very odd situation. So how did these men live? Did they actually have to become moral and actually had to live according to the doctrines they set up? Wow. Anyway, well, so that's quite ironic, isn't it? Anyways, really, when you talk about that, things haven't changed much over this centuries, have they? But sadly, a new industry started up with the men, though they were burning their previous women. They were now changing the role of women that they had in slavery. And that's another very sad story. And that's really over the border of what we're talking about today. So I won't say any more of that. And this was where the slavery of women only needed a single payment to be owned as slaves, to be possessed. And unfortunately, and I think a lot of people are not aware of this, the idea of the dowry around the world, sometimes it's the man paying the dowry to the women, sometimes it's the women paying the dowry to the man. But that actually has come down in a way from the tradition of paying for women as slaves. And certainly in some country, the idea of the dowry, especially in parts of the Middle East and the Asian, Asia, China areas, in rural areas, that's still the case, is that the man actually pays a dowry to his wife's parents for the privilege of marrying or really buying the wife. So that still exists. Anyway, the late medieval and Puritan branding of witches is very different to the Celtic Romance witch that we have. We may have a witches today. So we might have childhood memories from fairy tale books that the witch is a very wise mother. She's a hag. She stirs a hot black cauldron, and it's got wonderful secret recipes that's going to heal us. These are the things we might get out of. We don't think of them as alehouse wives like this. These alehouse wife witches there. So we don't really think of that. I'm trying to find. I did have a fairy book picture. Again, it's kind of lost into the darkness of. What have I got here? I'm trying to pick up the pieces. I don't know. We've had that one. Anyway, that's we had that. That's another alehouse women picture. As I say, it's all very random. But any images of their children that we would have if the witches had children, they'll be foraging, they'll be harvesting ingredients and helping their mothers with the pots. And we might not even envision a witch with her children, but we might envision a witch instead having elves and gnomes, don't we? Witches have elves and gnomes in fairy books. And make up their magic potions. Isn't that a bit like Father Christmas and the elves and so forth? Let's see what you're saying, since I'm bumbling along here a bit. Hello from Austin. We got Robin Hart Shepherd. Be sure to mark like on this video. I hope you're liking it. As I say, this is very bumbly because I was actually sorting out photos right up to the minute of going on the air. In fact, it said you're live, and I was putting photos up, so I never got the photos in any order. So that's why I'm lost with the photos. I usually have a sequence as I introduce the photos, but I hope it's making sense without that. I think we're getting through the story in the proper order anyway, so I trust you're enjoying that. So there we go. The witches were making fermentations, even if they were making herbal stuff. The alehouse wives created these cauldrons we can imagine overflowing and then cooling, creating a mess with drinks we assume to be safer than water. And the drinks that could cause any man to loosen up, lose control, and be at service and even the mercy of these very powerful alehouse women. And men would part with the contents of their purses, and they'd totally lose control of their patriarchal doctrines and order. And no, I'm not suggesting here that feminism could do the same thing and win recovery of their gender state by getting every man drunk. No, I don't think that's really the modern way of doing that. And of course, I can imagine it way back, these alehouse wives, these men, even these patriarchal men coming out. One of the ways they'd be enchanting them is helping them to believe that after a few ales, he was a stallion rather than a limp pony, because this helped them to empty the purses even more. And that was the building blocks, I think, of these alehouse women's wealth in many ways. However, the status of alehouse wives slowly grew from being the secret service of early medieval beggars, as I was pointing out right at the beginning, these humble, where they had the humble abode in the sort of hazel-built domes, if I can find the things. I'm going to get onto the next piece, which explains these domes a bit more, but I'm trying to show you the dome because this will be important before I get onto the next piece. As I say, I've got all these pictures. It shows me pictures. They're very, very tiny, so that's why I can't recognize them too easily. So, right, I'm trying to find that dome picture, and I'm scrolling, but it's not coming up. Not this time. There it is. There we go. So, get this back into your imagination. There we go. Imagine us by a holy well, for instance, because that's their only water source. So they go from the humble starters, disguised beggars, in a secret secret location, early medieval times, and over the 1,000 years of the medieval period, They became established as wealthy. They had massive taverns. That's actually a men's tavern. But because I can't find the woman's one, but imagine that is the woman's one. And this is this a woman's or is that a men's? No, that's a Norse one. What's this one? Yeah, it was growing. That was the first stages where they got that to that. Anyway, I leave it to your imagination that bit so I can get on a bit. Good evening from Sherry there. Okay. So these women, late medieval times, extremely wealthy. And today, a small business idea, we can grow up a business idea in a shed and then become a multinational within 10 years. Even look at Amazon. Amazon, wasn't it Jeff and his son in a garage deciding to sell books on the internet? Very humble. And now look at it, spaceships. So the way that can be done today is 100 times faster than the same thing could be done in medieval years. And of course, women are they're much more free to do that if they had an idea now. Women get an idea and they can explode very, very quickly with it. A Body Shop is a great example. Subway is another one, the Subway chain. I remember going to a talk in Florida with a woman who founded Subway, and it was still very small in Florida at the time, and she explained that. Look at that, Subway's worldwide. So that's sort of examples. It took 1,000 years in medieval times to really go through the descendants of the family to get to that level. But from about 12th century, men seemed to self-declare themselves. They were the rightful wealth makers, not women. And the alehouse women were now in irritation. The men's culture became more order through the boys' clubs and their guilds, their commerce guilds that were connected to the church. And, of course, all of this was a whitewash. The male-run guilds were whitewash because they were gangs. That's really what they were, gangs trying to attempt to stop the women gender having commercial takeovers, especially through alehouses and whatever else came from that. And the choice to burn women with fire, it kind of they explain it as a kind of God cleansing. They even committed people that they were playing with the devil. The burning will cleanse the area, and it's the way of God, and it's God's will to cleanse. Now, US visitors will perhaps be thinking of the alewives were they the victims of the Salem witch trials? And of course, in the Salem witch trials, they weren't only burned to the stake. I think I got a picture of that, although sad. Again, it's probably another picture I got. Sadly lost. It's not. I'm not going to find it. Oh, it's great, great shame. I'm sorry I can't find these pictures for you tonight. But they were ducking stalls. They used their ducking stalls in Salem. I think I had quite a nice picture of, as if it is nice, of a ducking stall, but I just can't find the thing. Oh yeah, I think that might be it. Is that the ducking stall? So that's how some of the Salem witches ended up. Very sad. But we still got to show the picture because it's part of the story. Anyway, so that's a sort of deja vu of what was happening with the European witch trials between 1400 and 1800, 400 years of witch trials, especially in Germany. Now, looking into the women of Salem who were accused of also dancing with the devil and mating, were they, that's the question I got, were they alewives too? And they were also serving the lust of the purest churchmen of North America that were about to burn them. Because when we think of the brewing industry in the USA, we think it really was a men's domain at that time. The idea that brewing was a craft of wise women in the USA, it's not believed that that's regarded as nonsense, that brewing and saloons and bars, that was a men's world. And certainly women employed by these places, but in some ways they sort of got a bit of control. You know, there was a lot of women hoteliers, weren't there, in the Wild West. And there is something when I think of the man's world of the bar, I had to bring this cartoon. It's nothing to do with it. I thought that was very funny. So typical. There you go. Anyway, and even in these sort of establishments, the women could get together and enforce their own terms very successfully. Now, the transformation of the brewing realm of women into yet another boys' club industry, taken away by the burnings, but the growing church organizations and their secret orders, their guilds, there's just more and more men joining up. The sons of the alehouse women were joining up, and the power that they had, it was impossible, near impossible for these alehouse women to operate. And it got even worse. From the 16th century, the alehouse women tradition, if they weren't in the nunneries, it was really, they were existing just by a thread, because new laws, governments were getting organized. The governments were very linked in Europe, very linked to the churches. And it was really the churches that formed the government. It was the guilds, the commerce guilds from the churches, linked to the churches, that actually formed political parties and formed the government that kind of challenged the monarchy. So during the 16th century, these Christian purist men, through their guilds and their government, they lobbied the government. If they weren't in the government, these guilds would lobby the government. And they lobbied for legislation that changed the brewing laws, and it really crippled how brewing was done, because they do this today. They bring in more and more rules. I saw it in the food industry in the USA, more and more rules about what was needed to pass safety. This whole health and safety nonsense was really bringing out rules. So you would buy more things. You had to buy more permits. You had to buy more licenses. And it was just buying all this fake stuff because it was the law. And this was what was going on in the 16th century. All this new bureaucratic stuff, you had to sign up for that, and you had to have these standards in your taverns, you had to have these standards in your bars, you have to have certain standards for brewing, quality of beer, standardization of ales, all this stuff. Very strict purity laws were starting up from 1600s, and it required a financial investment that was getting more and more outside of what these alehouse women were able to achieve, even though they seemed to be quite wealthy. They could either honor the law and nearly go bankrupt if they were going to be legal, but a lot of them feck that. And so they just carried on what they were doing. But of course, the law enforcement of these guilds and their guards that were with them, they caught out these women. These women everything was seized and resold, and they were put into prison just for breaking the law. And they couldn't exceed. They just couldn't upgrade to the new production requirements. And as I say, in these days, the excuse is, it's health and safety bollocks. And it forced these women out of business. But of course, another sinister thing happened from there. The women who couldn't invest in the standards, they were thrown out, everything was sold, they were thrown into prison. You can guess what happened then. They were let out of prison as slaves. So they were brought back they changed from wealthy brewing. They weren't going to be burnt on the stake. Instead, they were sold off as slaves. Very sad. And that happens in jails around the world today. Very sad. And it said they had to be slaves to repay the debts that had happened because they didn't match these new bureaucratic laws. Very, very sinister stuff. So there was about 100 years of these Puritan laws getting very strict at the time. And so the breweries became monopolized by men because they knew how to cut the corners. They were in the boys' club after all. Then there was another set of new laws, end of 16th century. The women between 14 and 40 of childbearing age, they couldn't be in brewing anyway. It was illegal. So it had to be women over 40, and they could have their granddaughters under 14. But anyone in between, no, they couldn't be alehouse wives. So brewing for women, they had to be outside childbearing age. And the excuse for those laws was because they said that if women were of childbearing age, that they cheated customers out of money because they needed them for their children. And this was very unacceptable and very sinful. But then were the men who started up in brewing, were they even more trustworthy? I don't know. So these church guilds and Puritan men, they grew, and they just took over everything. And someone was saying a couple of weeks ago, oh, in all the countries in Europe, it's the men that started up the breweries. Yeah, they made the impression they set up the breweries, but I can't go into the deep history. It was the alehouse wives that were the true founders, and all that's been wiped out of the history. But these men, they still had their sort of lust. There was still there was sort of a thread of alehouse women still operating, and these purist men did find them. That still carried on even underground. But their purism, of course, it was all in the name of God. But similar is still happening out in the Caribbean. As I said, there was these men that they would slip out, and they knew of the secret alehouse women that were still operating in the old way. And if they wanted a lusty weekend, they would go off to the inns of these alehouse women, drink the ale, have the lusty time. Well, that's going on today. A big business is in the Caribbean, especially in the Dominican Republic, I think, whereas men, they go off the window dressing of a business conference. And what this business conference is, they're being linked up to an alternative wife, I think I would say, for the week. The business conference is there, but of course they'll be telling their wives and families, oh, I'm off to the business conference in the Caribbean. No, they're off for a week of nookie. So that still goes on, and that's a huge business, the corporate lust bucket. So I'm going to get to some good stuff now. That's all the cruel stuff over and done with. I can remember the witch hunts in England, the torture and murder of innocent women continued till the daughter of a judge was arrested or drummed up charges. At this point, the law took and overruled their wicked, superstitious allegations. One thing I haven't got to with this is linked, and that's quite a thing in England as well, is that when the men managed to push the alehouse women out of the bars, out of their taverns, those pubs doubled up as courthouses, and those courthouses were actually used to charge these women of being witches. So these women were throwing out their alehouses, being charged as witches in their family heritage alehouses, and charged burnt from the stake. That's another essence of the cruelty. But of course, all kinds of hangings happened, and there was some famous Judge Jeffreys, people like that. So people being hanged for all sorts. And that's why a lot of these medieval pubs, if you go around on sort of tourism trips around the Cotswolds, Somerset, places like that, you'll see pubs that have got gallows outside, or the pubs are named after gallows, and that's because they were semi-courthouses. So thanks for bringing that up, and I wasn't going to talk about that, but that's just another angle of this story. Who we got? Someone here who's not coming up. Oh, hi, Bloomer Gardner from Asheville. Lovely to have you on board on this. Anyway, let's get to the nice stuff now, and this will kind of complete the setting for you. But what motivated ancient women to turn their hand to brewing in the first place? Maybe it was a conscience, a need to bring about sanitation of water to create a safe drink for their families and also the community. You would think the water was safe in ancient times, but as I say, there was bacteria from the farming runoff that they didn't really understand what happened when they got into it. And there was an increase in human excrements as well. It wasn't being dealt with. So I was pointing out those little huts that they were put there by the holy wells. And this is where we're going to get into something interesting on this. Okay, I'm leaving that alone. So there's a mystery, the Boulogne stones. I keep saying Boulogne for some reason. These are you get in the holy wells. I'm showing them that. No, that one's no longer there. That one, that's actually a Kiju at Knockranny, not Knockranny, Kilronan. There, that's been put on a pedestal. It's no longer there. I'm not going to go into. It's discussing why that was taken. That's just outside the Holy Well and the runoff from the Holy Well, and they were used perhaps for herbs and perhaps as an aid for the brewing. And this is another one, Monasteriden. They call that Boulogne stone the dragon's head for obvious reasons, and there is a dragon story there as well. But I think I'm going into that next week. But there you go. There are stones that would go in there and part of the preparation anyway. And other plant, as I say, plant ingredients, because it wasn't until Sir Hildegard popularized hops for ale. They were using things like dandelion, burdock, marshmallow, oats. Well, they were using oats within the barley. And I said heather, nettles, all these things were from ale and beer. Hops came a bit later. So I'd like to talk about an ancient site that you may be familiar with, the Full of Flour. If I can pull up the Full of Flour picture from my hidden pictures here, we'll try and get some Full of Flour. Is this one that I want? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to change my my background here, and then we'll have one in the background. So if I get lost, at least you'll see it. There we go. There's a Full of Flour in my background there. And right, we'll get on to the pictures for that as well. So I use that for the green screen. And there it is anyway. There's the Full of Flour, the trough. There's a hearth. And there's the well. Now, the story is archaeologists, you go around with archaeologists. These are all over Ireland. And they're regarded as cooking areas. Well, the way that's described, I'm intrigued with this. They're interpreted in many ways. The Fulach, Fulachd, is described as a means of heating water, a bit like a bubbling cauldron. And the Fla is the interpretation through the Latin is very vague, but it seems to be talking about capturing of something from the wild. But some people who say you've got to have a direct translation, I don't know why, but they've translated it as deer. And of course, deer is wild, but people are so obsessed with translating into things rather than conditions and things going on. I like the idea of the flour being a description of capturing something from the wild. So there you go. If you put it together, it's the water heating up connected to something being caught in the wild. So there's an assumption that these pits are used for boiling up deer. People think, oh, you catch a deer, you put the deer, you warm up the water, you heat up the stones, throw the stones into the water, throw the deer meat in there, boil it up. The whole thing there doesn't make sense. Why the hell do you use fire energy to warm up stones, throw it in the water? Why not just put the deer straight on the fire? It doesn't make sense to have a double standard there. Oh, have the stones and put. I think most people prefer barbecue than boiled deer, surely. So that idea has never made sense to me. But the one thing that does happen around now, especially from Sawan going on to mid-winter, there's an increase in natural wild yeast that's in the air. The fruit has been harvested, or a lot of fruit is still left on the trees. Hawthorns, people who haven't picked up hawthorns, they're turning to yeast. All kind of sloes are turning to yeast. They do very quickly. Leftover blackberries, they're turning to yeast. So there's all this wild yeast that's suddenly in the air. And the tree sap also gives emissions. As the tree sap comes down at the end of its season, that actually releases wild yeast out through the trees. So you've got all this wild yeast in the air at this time. And this is the final harvest of Sawan, is this wild yeast. And yeah, wild yeast can be collected wonderfully as a sourdough starter. when you're starting off a sourdough starter, leave it in the open, collects up the wild yeast, it ferments, bubbles away, and that can be used for ale brewing. But it does need more brewing skills than the regular yeast that you sort of buy at the brewers. Wild yeast can easily cause contamination, but they would have had the brewing craft skills to understand how to stop that in wild yeast, and that would have been a wisdom that's perhaps been lost over the years. So one thing for sure is that wild yeast beer or ale, like wild yeast sourdough, is probiotic. So there's another health thing. You've got probiotic ale. I'm surprised the health food companies haven't worked that one out yet. So that ale with the wild yeast would be a lot friendlier on the gut than the modern ales that can really wipe out the gut today. So that was a huge thing. So that is a reason why these old alehouse brewery ales, though they were tonics, they were very healthy, probably because they started with this probiotic wild yeast. And so no yeast infections from those old ancient ales. And they did the body good, you know, in a way. And I think I've got a picture on this one. Let's have fun with this one. Where have we heard of an ale that does us good? I'm going back to an old advert here. There's an ale that does us a lot of good. And probably I've lost the picture. Oh, darn it. So much for the joke. Next year, I'll have these photos in order. But you probably know what I'm trying to talk about here. And, oh, darn it, I've lost the picture. So I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm going to go back into my green screen, and I've got the picture there. There we go. That's what I'm talking about, or was talking about. There you go. What would Ireland be without its Guinness? There you go, got the commercial adverts. So that could have been a slogan for all of those ancient brewers there. So let's get that one back up again. At least I found it on the backgrounds there. All right, there we go. So the importance of ale being drunk, it was safer than water then because it was probiotic. So back to the full flour now. And as I say in flour, it means to me of the wild. So does this mean there was a collection of wild yeast put full of flour together? And the possible interpretation to me seems to be the bubbling pit that collects the wild yeast. And does this cause fermentation? Now, what I'm imagining here in these pits, what if, I'm showing you the original rustic, early medieval willow hazel domes that these alehouse wives operated in by the well. What if there was a hazel dome over this trough? Imagine that. This was easier to set up than the expense of a cast iron big black cauldron. That needed money. This is something that could be done in the landscape. You've got the hearth, you've got the trough, you've got the hearth for the heat, you've got the trough here. You could open up perhaps the skins, you could bring in the wild yeast would be present. I'm just speculating here. But wouldn't this be a brewery? This is what I'm saying. Rather than trying to boil up deer, and most of the juice is going into the water anyway, rather than collect it up on a barbecue, is the full of flour an old brewery? That's my question. And then when the stuff was ready, did the pointy hat brewer go off to town and brought people up here? And this is where they had the earliest alehouse times. They would bring the customers back to their broomy sheds here. And let's get back to that because I'm going to get your imagination going if I can get this picture back again. Oh dear. I apologize. I might have to go to my back screen again to get this one back up. No, it's not working for me to bring. There she is. Now imagine this. What if that was over a full of flour? Imagine that. What if that was over that. Well, I'm in the way of it, isn't it? That's what I'm kind of, and imagine that with that, and then you got the well there and so forth. This is what I'm imagining for this time. Speculation, bullshit maybe, but it's just putting some logic together. Put your comments together about that. But I think this can demonstrate how these alehouse wives, especially the ancient ones, had a more vital role in their local communities to keep them very healthy and nourished. And it wasn't just about luring men to get drunk and lusty. They were there, the alehouse wives, for the good of their community in more ways than one. So let's see. I am going into overtime, and I'm coming up to the lovely ending here. What's as far as I can remember reading about the witch hunts? Oh, we've said that one. Oh, we haven't got. No, there isn't any new comments from you, unless I've missed something. Oh, Shell Coach, here we go. I have to rewatch from the beginning. Makes sense to me. It's a brewery. Yeah, I'm speculating just from all the different. This is where I try. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. I always play the game of putting archaeology concepts together. Yeah, what do you think about this, lads? Monica here. Right. So anyway, let's give a conclusion. And I think understanding of some of the history stories of alehouse wives and how they become branded as witches may help to understand women's positions in their cultures and how they have changed. And then, of course, we're getting this in the news today, aren't we? The Taliban takeover, Texas law changes, the revived Republican ideals that are very much like these guilds and these boys' clubs. And then there's the antics and the deeds of people like Brazil's Bolsonaro and Belarus's Lukashenko, and even Russia's Putin is starting to get onto the game now. So women around the world, they must be seriously asking, where the hell is all this going for us? Are they, women coming together, forming their own guilds and their own collectives and own sort of awareness, publicity. But where's this going? All it is the boys' clubs are just banding together and putting those fictitious walls around them rather than the equality that we really all want and what we're really born for. So repeat again, brewing is still the way that a culture is defined through all of this. And I say, can you imagine Ireland without Guinness? Even the USA without its Southern Comfort. Japan without its sake. The brewing industry seems to now have been taken over by men worldwide, but it's not quite worldwide. As I said, Bolsonaro in Brazil is only part of South America. There's a lot of the brewing industry that's growing that's in South America. I don't think I've got a South America example in my pictures. I do have a lovely African sample because in Africa, the alehouse wives are back in action there. And I wish I could find this photo for you. I think this is delightful. And this is from an African brewers. And I only picked it up a few minutes before the show. I thought, oh yeah, I've got to feature this in the show, and it's kind of vanished. Oh dear. But it was just to demonstrate how things are really moving on wonderfully well. There she is. There we go. Successful. There she's trying out in Nigeria there. Lovely. There we go. But much South Central America, brewing is then back in the domain of women. Certainly in many of the African countries, and similar. And more women are re-entering the brewing industry around the world. And the difference now is they're not going to be burnt as witches, are they? The men might try and push them out still, but I believe it will be worthy of ale and beer lovers to raise a glass and celebrate the return of what was originally the domain of the alehouse wives, that was really caring and very much in balance with the drinking men patrons. Now, to celebrate the new season of the witch that we are now entering into, it does seem that many women today, they like to be identified as being witches, but they're not brewers. A lot of these modern witches, they regard themselves as kind of ultra spiritual people, don't they? They're kind of a bit like this. That's the sort of modern witch. I don't think she's got a brewery going, but she's probably brewing some great concoctions at home, and is an excellent local herbalist. This is the sort of thing that happens. So although I'm cracking jokes, these are wonderful people as well, and the work they do, even for the community, is essential, and especially people who feel that they might be a little messed up by trying to understand the health service. So there is a role, but they're not alehouse women as such, but a lot of the tricks of the original alehouse women are with them. So for many women, witches are their heroes now, and they're role models. More as independent rebel herbalists than alehouse wives. They don't really operate as alehouse wives, not in that way. And some women have actually replaced that witch word with something grander and much more authoritative. A lot of people, instead of calling themselves witches, they're warriors, aren't they? They're warrior goddesses. They're kind of Morrigan people. I think there's another warrior goddess, very theatrical. But at the same time, they're probably very crafted herbalists as well. I hope so, anyway. But there's nothing wrong with the theatre and the entertainment of that as well. So there's no ale bonking and my special baked pizza for you, my lads, if you're with those women, until you recognise those women's positions. So I'd love your comments on that one. But this seems to be what women are invoking that are interested in the witchery herbalism. It's all part of the equality, and not the way that it was for the early medieval alehouse women. So the witch and the warrior goddess image is mentoring again and helping us to honor that equality. It is sort of pushing aside patriarchal cultures. Now, of course, and now, do I have this the pictures to support my closing line on this? I really should have this flick of the switch, but it's not here. No, I was going to crack a nice joke to finish with, but it's not going to happen because I don't have the pictures on hand. Yeah, no, I'm surprised I didn't blend that. But you can imagine it. You've seen it. That there are some billionaire men that have got their penis-shaped spaceships, but there are women that still hold the magical mystery of their broomstick. So I didn't have the spaceship picture, but there's the broomstick. So any more comments? Any more questions? That's all I've got. That's me. That's me completing the the series of the God, I even forget why I'm calling it now, aren't I? The witches, cauldrons, and ales. So that was the end of the 3-part. Anyway, next year I'm going to revisit this. I've got extra stuff. It'll be a bit more organized, a better studio with this. So I hope this introduction. I was kind of very much off the cuff with this series. But back to the regular nature folklore sessions. I haven't got pictures for this, but 17th of October, which is next Sunday, I've got the folklore of ravens and other corvids, crows, ravens, and other corvids. That's on Sunday. And then the 24th of October, we got part 1 of the origins of Sowan. We got Ornagatan. I'm in Mucka, up in Ulster for that one. Then the 31st of October, part 2 of Sowan Origins. We've got the hills of Talaka and Tara. And then it's your turn on the 7th of November, our social event, Sowan Traditions and Gatherings. And hopefully it'll be full of guests with your poems, stories, your Halloween, your Sowan stories. And of course, 7th of November is right on the day of the ancient sidereal time from Babylonian calculations, not this more modern Gregorian 15th century calendar, which is amazing how that calendar could be used for traditions that go back thousands of years before. But that's the way we accept it, I suppose. But anyway, 7th of November, we have our social. So please message me with your stories, as I say, and let's see what you're saying with this, because I better go now. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you for Robin for tuning in. Thanks for the presentation, even though it was all over the place. John Elise there, that was wonderful and delightful. I want to read on it more now. Delightful there we got from Terry Slack. And thank you so much, Lee Lynch. I hope it was sort of understandable. I did repeat stuff on purpose. And there we go, S. Lee there as well. Thank you, sir. And my mouse is stuck. So, Andrea Rose Ward. Thank you so much from Florida. Thank you all being with me. And I'm so pleased. There was a large YouTube response there, which is fantastic. Monica, take care. Thank you all for that. And I'll be glad to get guests back again. So thank you for putting up with me for all this time. For those that came on later, you can watch the archive video, and you can use the bell to subscribe as well. So until next Sunday, play well. And do I have something to play you out with? I'll get to that. So many pictures I didn't show you because it got all muddled. Sorry about that. So celebrate a great week, safe week, engaging in your wonders, your inspirations, all your enchantment. And that's enough from me tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you Sunday. Thanks. Bye. And I don't have the picture that says bye-bye that I usually do. So I'll give you another bye-bye. Thank you.